Sir.
What's up? Yeah.
Cool.
Let's go.
Okay. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining for our special edition of Speciale Talks. I'm super thrilled to see so much people here joining in and yes. And personally, I'm super excited for this today's topic on Gen AI, which we've been spending more time for last more than a year to 6 months, learning what is happening in the market. So we thought we should have someone who's seen the technology curve from the beginning of internet era, and the cloud era, now the artificial intelligence era. So we just thought one OG in this ecosystem is Dheeraj. So we thought we should have Dheeraj to know, talk about how this evolution is happening. Honored to have you in this panel, Dheeraj Pandey, the co-founder of DevRev and founder of Nutanix here. Hi, Dheeraj. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dhanush, and I really appreciate being here. It's a great opportunity to learn with and also looking forward to communicate and interact.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, and also I'd like to please welcome our general partner and the moderator for today's session, our partner Arjun Rao. Without any further ado, Arjun takes over the virtual stage and kickstart this event. Thank you, Arjun, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dhanush. Super excited to be here, everyone. Good morning and probably good evening in the West Coast. I'm speaking here from Bangalore. Dheeraj is in the Bay Area, right? So different time zones, but we're making this work. Super excited to be here for, like Dhanush said, a very special episode of Speciale Talks, the series of conversations that we have with operators, entrepreneurs, etc., in the enterprise software SaaS ecosystem, right? As part of Speciale Invest, we're an early stage venture fund investing in enterprise software, cutting edge technologies, as well as frontier technologies in hardware, engineering, and sciences, right? We're a young firm for about 6 years, investing from a pool about $50 to $75 million, $500,000 to $1 million early stage check size, right? Typically want to be the first institutional check in founders that are building generational companies. So that's about us, and we love to have these conversations with amazing founders and people who build great technology and great products and great companies. And who better to have this conversation than Dheeraj today. Dheeraj, thank you so much for joining us. Really an honor and privilege to be speaking to you. Appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, it's my honor as well. So thank you for your time.
Lovely. And Dheeraj needs no introduction. He's been in the startup tech ecosystem for a very, very long time. I'm not going to even use the years, but he's seen cycles, evolution for a long period of time. The internet, the mobile wave, the enterprise wave, the cloud wave, and now, of course, we are all in the middle of the AI, the Gen AI wave, right? And he's, of course, built category-defining companies such as Nutanix, took them public. They're doing phenomenally well. $5 to $6 billion company today, if I'm not mistaken, in the public markets. And now he's going at it again with DevRev, right? It's about 1.5 to 2 years now, or a little more than that.
A little over 2 years, yeah.
A little over 2 years. So that's super exciting. Yeah. Again, taking a crack at some very, very hard problems. So, first question, Dheeraj, for you. You've seen so many years and so many big technology shifts, right? The ones that we spoke about. Where do you see Gen AI in these so many shifts that you've seen? Is this the big deal that everybody's talking about? Is this the real deal, right? And why do you feel so?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really believe in is just like AI. I believe in matching patterns as well and finding correlations. And I think the more things change, the more they remain the same. And as they say, history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. And Gartner talks about hype cycles and how things actually really go up and then come down and then eventually stabilize after a valley of disillusionment. I think the internet went through this, and the mobile world went through this. And I think we saw less of this in the cloud, but this is the decade in which we'll see a lot of that froth as well about Gen AI, because many a time, there is so much money that gets poured into a space because of this fear of missing out by both VCs and entrepreneurs. Everybody just wants to be part of that wave. So a lot of features actually become products, even though they're just features. And, very few features, become products, but very few products become companies. And then even fewer companies become businesses, So there's a real sort of filtration that happens in this funnel, going from features to products to companies to businesses. And I think it's going to happen in the next 3 years as well. I mean, you remember the internet bubble in many ways. There was also a crypto bubble with a real lack of product management. And obviously there was a housing bubble 10 years before that, in the US at least, And in all these bubbles, I think people forget to be grounded, and there's a ton of money that pours in. And I think the last 10, 12 years, the interest rate was so low that, everybody got a lot of money to invest. And I feel like that will happen with GenAI as well. Product management is going to be lacking. There'll be a lot of features that will actually, do it quick, because all of a sudden there's like, hey, you just need to get to quick product market fit. And I think there'll be many companies that will do $1 million, many companies that will probably do $5 million. But the question is, are you really building for more than 5 million? Are you just waiting for exits? And maybe those things will actually be okay for VCs and entrepreneurs. But I feel like there's going to be this settling down of this noise in the next 3 to 5 years for sure.
No, that's very interesting. And that's a reminder for all of us to, of course, be excited about this paradigm shift, right? But at the same time, be grounded and be focused on building something fundamental for the long haul, right? In that context, right, you've been building DevRev for the last 2.5 years. First, maybe give everybody a flavor of what you're trying to change, what you're trying to impact, what's the vision with DevRev, correct? And on top of that, now that there is this capability, this tool, GenAI, that is available, correct? Does that add to what you're trying to do at DevRev, right? Does that turbocharge something, or it is business as usual?
Yeah, if you go back in time to 2007 through 10, in many ways, a lot of our personal infrastructure, personal lives got converged into an iOS or an Android, because we used to have a lot of devices and everybody was really trying to do more with smaller gadgets. Because in many ways, the iPod and the flip phone and the 2G to 3G transition, there was a lot that was going on. I mean, the new cameras that were coming out that didn't need film rolls. So many things were actually in the path to digitization. The TomToms, the Garments, every road in the world actually being digitized in some sense. A lot of those things were happening. And here comes this idea of converging our personal lives with iOS. And maybe 4 or 5 years later, this happened when we started to converge IT infrastructure with AWS. And many startups who had never seen anything better, they stopped stitching a lot of data center stuff. They didn't stitch servers and storage and networking and security and virtualization and databases. All of that came as services inside of VPC. But people still stitch, and founders still stitch a lot of tools right now to really just build their companies. And we feel like there's an opportunity to really converge business infrastructure as well. And if you look at from Intercom to Zendesk to Product Board and Pendo to Jira to HubSpot, there's a lot that they actually bring together. And nobody owns this pathway. Everybody just has built some two-way connectors, but they bring data, but not the whole context. And there's nothing real time that's going on here as well. So we felt like there was an immense opportunity to really bring this all together in a converged business infrastructure. And I think a lot of startups will stop stitching stuff themselves. They are not IT, and we want to left shift a lot of that integration to DevRev. Now, what has emerged as we started looking at this was like, wow, there's a really rich knowledge graph that is between customers, product, and people, both internal people as well as end users, that needs to come together. And that knowledge graph knows no boundaries. You can keep adding more and more about customers and everything they do to their tickets and issues and requests and enhancements to their users, to their meetings and all this stuff. It's just so much that you can do on the customer side. Same thing on the product side, like products and the capabilities and the features and the sub features and the APIs and the webhooks and the users and the latency. And there's a lot on the product side as well. And similarly on the people side, these orgs and teams and, what they're doing with product and customers. So you can really build a very rich knowledge graph, which is what DevRev has actually built. We've done a lot of ETL from existing systems to bring all this data on top. And the key sort of realization here is that departments and a lot of these siloed CRMs like sales CRM, support CRM, marketing CRM, even product CRM in whatever little way that actually exists in the mid office, they were all built with departments in mind. Because departments were a way to organize people, organize humans. But AI actually knows no boundaries. It doesn't know about departments. It doesn't care about departments. So you have to throw the entire knowledge graph to this machine. And in fact, you have to give it everything, nothing short of everything, That's where the richness emerges. So we really feel proud about this knowledge graph between customers, product, and people. And we are going and delivering this, platform, but on top of this, we have 3 apps and a chatbot. So we replaced Intercom, we replaced Zendesk, we replaced AHA product board, we replaced a Jira. But of course, we can sit next to some of these too. Like, we can sit next to your Jira, we can sit next to your HubSpot. And the 3 apps are a support app, which is really modern. It's completely AI driven, but very real time, very much like Slack, as opposed to the stodgy systems of record that people have been forced to get to. There's collaboration built into every noun, every verb. There's flash commands. It's just the way you dealt with Slack because it was the only interdepartmental tool available was Slack for collaboration. And the reason is because, well, I don't have a license for this. I don't have a license for that. I only bought seats for these many, because business of systems of record were very expensive things.
Yeah.
So for developers to hop onto support, for support people to hop onto sales, for sales people to hop onto anything on the product was really, really expensive. So we learned a lot from Slack. We learned a lot from these systems of record. We said, let's bring these two together and support and build and grow are the 3 apps on top, which gets rid of at least 6 tools that startups have to stitch together.
Interesting. No, that's very interesting. And I think the bridging that, and it's in the name, right, for the developers to go to revenue, which is product, customer, and all the things.
And makers are too far away from these things. And especially, as my sort of light bulb moment in all of this was, we were doing more than $1 billion in 2018 at Nutanix. And we had almost 15,000 customers at that point. And we had acquired a couple of companies, 2 of them actually from Bangalore. And we were like trying to figure out, okay, what's the go-to-market for this? And, I was asking the marketing team, like, okay, so how are we marketing this? And they're like, well, we have a list, we have a contact database and stuff like that. So I'm like, how are you taking new products to leads and prospects? Shouldn't we be taking new products to existing users and existing customers? And there was a pause, and then someone said, oh, that list is with support. And I'm like, wow, what a beast have I built, where existing users with a separate department and prospects and leads and contacts with a separate department. That just gives you kind of the problem, which is the tip of the iceberg of how each department is just a silo into itself. I mean, we had constant battles in sales and marketing as to who is a bigger moron. One of them thinks they're generating a ton of good leads, and the other one thinks they're just too lazy. And that's, I mean, in the new world now, the SLG and PLG coming together, you need to think about growth as one, as opposed to this is sales and this is marketing. With customer success, it's the same problem. Sales and support cannot be 2 different things. And with all this PLG stuff, support and product cannot be 2 different things. It has to all come together. So there was a lot of secular trends that were emerging. I'm like, this is bold and audacious, but at the same time, we feel like new startups actually deserve something better, just like they deserved AWS more so than stitching a lot of data center stuff by hand. They deserve something better, and that basically became DevRev. Now, for the larger enterprises, we are trying to also be a little humble but very pragmatic. That look, maybe they won't replace their systems of record, but the knowledge graph is being fed to 2 data structures. There's an LLM, which really will answer a lot of questions, become the co-pilot for support people and product managers and customer success people and so on. And then also analytics, a lot of last 20 years of SaaS, they all basically punted analytics to the end users, saying, hey, you got to go figure out how to really build a warehouse and a visualization engine on top. So at Salesforce, they'd say, go use Snowflake and use a Tableau on top, and then use DT or Fivetran for ETL. All that work is 10, 15, 20 people teams. There's data teams, there's ETL teams, there's warehousing teams, there's visualization teams, which ideally, I think it should be stitched by someone like us. So we bring all the support ops data, the product ops data, the eng ops data, the sales ops data, just bring it all together, and hopefully they can build a Copilot in 5 minutes, and they can build a warehousing solution and an analytics solution for support and product and eng and sales in 5 minutes. That's basically our goal. That just like what AWS says, build your data center in 5 minutes. I think our goal is, can we help them do this in 5 minutes rather than 5 quarters with $5 million and 50 people and so on.
No, truly exciting. I think how stitching together can be made simpler, easier, ready to use, right? There's a big opportunity. You're right. I think last quite a few years, there's been this whole, like you said, features becoming small to medium-sized companies, and then there's been a burst of tools out there, right? Now, coming to GenAI impact on this, right? You started, like you said, 2+ years ago, 2.5 years ago. Of course, you thought about AI enabling a bunch of these things, the graph itself and the apps on top, etc., right? But over the last 6 to 9 months, right, we have this beast, which is the LLMs and the GenAI capabilities that are now sort of public utilities, or at least being provided in that form or shape, right? Talk to us a little bit about what fascinates you about this whole shift, correct? What it enables, number one. And therefore, hey, how are you now rethinking or saying what else can you do on top of DevRev or faster for DevRev with GenAI?
Absolutely. So at the core of our thinking is this new object model, which is the knowledge graph's centroid in some sense, is the product. We're like, look, the product is the core of this. Any company exists because of the product. And the other side of that, if you look at it, is customers. So if these two things are common across all departments, then, and nobody can argue against it. Like the true north is the customer, and the means to that end is the product. I look at the product as this thing, and it's like a Y-shaped thing. On the left is kind of your growth side of things. You go from PMs to PMMs to CSMs, eventually to SEs and As and so on. So that's the growth line. There's a line around support where you really need to have PMs focus on everything coming from support. There's a dotted line with chatbots, and like you want to have direct path to the end users on the browser and the mobile apps. And then the thing that's going south is engineering, where PMs need to work really, really closely with VPs of engineering and tech leads and saying, capital allocation, why are people still working on this when something else is more important? How do you bring all the sales data that's close enough to tech leads for them to prioritize and do all that? But how do you do a ton of AI on this natural language, busy and noisy channel support to PMs? I mean, PMs dread to triage. They'll probably take thousands of hours because there's no incentives to have good data on this side. The KPIs to close tickets fast every day. It's like we've made, engineers into agents and agents into robots because of this, and there's too many false vanity KPIs on the support path as well, So we feel like there's an immense opportunity to just do an amazing job with deduplication and clustering and classification on this support path. But also do a lot of generative work on taking tickets, anonymizing them, generating KB articles, and feeding it into a vector database. So at the core of our thinking, and we built our own vector database because nothing was economical enough for a PLG motion that we have. In fact, we'll talk about the architecture of analytics too, which again, we had to think very hard about the freemium customer because we couldn't have said this is only for the enterprise. So the vector database that we've built, in fact, there's no other CRM or business software company that's built something from scratch. We had to because we have a certain budget for every freemium tenant every month, like, okay, they cannot burn more than 50 cents of AWS dollars per tenant, which could have 3, 4, 5 users, So then we look at the 12 months is like $6 a year. That's a marketing cost. That's cost of acquisition. So that is a big part of our thinking, that everything we've done, every AWS service that we've done, we really think of micro slicing it for the tenant, So we call them micro tenants, not multi-tenants, and the vector database architecture was equally important for that. Everything is being fed to a vector database. So it actually will help a lot of this pathway between agents to L3 engineers, and L3 engineers will need to debug things, hopefully without developers, and cloud ops people. And they could do a lot of that because they see a ton of English coming from the customers, but everything coming from CloudWatch is also English, and everything in the GitHub repos is also English, and everything in the code is also English. There's an immense opportunity to create copilots for L3 engineers.
Interesting.
There's an immense opportunity to go create KB articles for free and things like that, and really constantly feed it to the vector database. And if you look at this other path, the growth path, a lot of product managers, many of them have just grown through engineering. There's no MBA for product management in some sense, think about it.
Yeah.
So this thinking about, okay, I have a growth line, I have a support line, I have an engineering line, and I need to bring all this stuff together, just doesn't exist for most founders or product managers. We feel like on the growth side, they all stop at features. Many of the PMs are really mostly project managers or program managers, not product managers. We feel like with the way we have thought about this operating system can help them really think through what a role of a product manager is.
Could you help unravel that a little bit, right? What do you see ideally? What are the best product managers doing that they are not doing?
And I go back to the why here. It's like start with why, tongue in cheek. I think the support side, they need to really get a lot of help from machines. On this dotted line with chatbots, they need to be in real time, especially in new features. They need to nudge, they need to promote, they need to place a lot of the new features directly in the app, both mobile and web browser itself. They can't be at the mercy of support for everything, especially the new things. They're the ones who are the most sort of knowledgeable when it comes to what needs to be promoted and where should it be placed and how do I have direct conversations with the end user without having to go through 4 layers of people and so on. They also are very good at saying, look, there has to be a baton zone between me and a PMM. In fact, that's never been defined in our industry. A lot of things fall because they stop short at developing enhancements or features, and they just do amazingly good project management, which is what Jira has taught them. Like, hey, you got to put this user story and epics and initiatives, but that's all work. There's nothing customer-centric about that. So you need to think about the customer, and then you think about the storytelling. So where features end in Jira or epics end in Jira is where real value begins for a product manager to say, how do I take this and really create release notes automatically? And you can do generative AI for release notes, from these enhancements. From there, you can go and say, what about pushing this through GenAI images and blogs and things like that, social media pushes, basically run the baton before a marketing person picks up. Even thinking about launches and campaigns in ways that makes you into a growth person, because at the end of the day, a product manager's role is not say growth is a separate department, customer success is a different department. When the interest rates were low, we created all these fuzzy departments. Right now that interest rates are high and probably will remain so for the next 3 to 5 years, we need to think hard about the product manager, not just being a feature manager or a project manager or program manager, but to be a true general manager. Which is what a lot of founders also have to be. They have to think really hard about how do we not create these boundaries like, okay, you end here and marketing starts there. And then product marketing suffers because there's not enough stories. All these stories are sitting in the English text of PRDs and tickets and design docs and KBs and all this stuff that needs to be fed to machines so that you can actually take it from feature and enhancements to, what you'd call not just tactical release notes, but eventually to blogs and launches and campaigns and things like that. And then again, going south to engineering, there's immense opportunities to really just do not just analytics, but a lot of AI on understanding code and where the GitHub transactions are and why are they stuck, and there's log jams and things like that. Capital allocation is one thing that, you know, we never get taught about product management. The biggest thing about being a great PM is capital allocation. You know, it's, you know, they are a place that makes demand meet supply, supply being of developers or designers and so on. And we never taught this, that look, all you are is a marketplace that's trying to figure out how to fit all this demand with supply. The supply sits with VP of engineering. There's constant tussle. Like, well, I work in my AHA and product board and you work in Jira. And the developers are rolling their eyes on, like, I don't know which world these guys sit in. You know, they're sitting in a planning tool that, you know, you come out of this planning offsites, you have all this hunky-dory stories about the plan, but eventually where the work happens is Jira.
Yeah.
And even
I think
these two guys are not working together, you know, at some level. So I think there's an immense opportunity for converging a lot of this, but having a singular vector database where you can ask questions that really traverse the knowledge graph, all the way from GitHub transactions and GitHub code to the issues that they're tracking, to the enhancements, to the release notes, to the blogs, to the launches, to the campaigns.
No, fascinating. So much in there, in the details there. So thanks for that. We want to take a step back and say, hey, this whole, you know, capability that, you know, LLMs leading to, you know, that enables GenAI has so much opportunity, has so much potential, right? How should different stakeholders in the ecosystem think about how they can leverage this opportunity, this point in time, to do what, right? So I'm trying to say, hey, where are the biggest opportunities, right? We can think of, at least we try to think of the stack with GenAI as, obviously you can use GenAI different, either open source or OpenAI or other APIs to build applications. Whether it is functional applications, industry specific applications, so on. That's maybe one top layer. At the absolute bottom is, of course, the LLMs themselves, which is the infrastructure / utility, which is sort of proxy to AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, right? The cloud equivalents, right? It seems like some of the big boys have taken strong positions there. And of course, there are some open source opportunity or options emerging. And in the middle, there's a lot of tooling, there's a lot of enablement, right? These are all possible, right? How should a founder who's starting off a company today or this year, right? How should they think about, hey, what can I do in this time and moment, right? With this available, with this change, right? And with this sort of efficiency, the superpower available to them.
So let's start with the anti-patterns. Like what I would not feel too happy about if I'm building a company, if I'm raising money from people that I need to be responsible towards. I think prompt engineering on GPT-4 is a feature. Everybody will have it, everybody. And I think at the end of the day, those things are what the hype cycle will create. Just people will just do a little prompt engineering with GPT-4, especially OpenAI, or call the API, give it a little prompt and so on. Now, if you get deeper into vector databases, that's getting like, you're really thinking hard about semantic search being at the core of your engine as well. Then you'll say, well, will I use the same embedders and encoders, like, which is basically commodity, like universal sentence encoder or SSE and things like that? Or do you have to make it domain specific? Because at the core of vector databases is embeddings, you know, it's about finding adjacencies, and adjacencies is a very semantic thing, you know. The English encoders might actually not pay attention and pause at the words that really matter to you because they're also English words, you know. So how you really go and think hard about, do I need an LLM to create an encoder, will be, now you're thinking deeper about AI as opposed to just doing prompt engineering on OpenAI or something, you know. Then the question is, would you need to fine tune a model? And you can't fine tune foundational models, you know, it's just, they're so big now, they're like the adult brain and it just wouldn't change, you know. So you have to take these child models, like 40 billion parameters, 50 billion parameters, 80 billion parameters, and Llama 2 actually will give a run for anybody else's money, given how good they are. I think that there's opportunities to go deeper into open source, smaller models with even, doesn't have to be a lot of data, but high quality data that can actually help build or at least fine tune these models for your domain. And finally, the question—
maybe industry specific, domain specific, you think, or directionally?
Yeah, with the right attentions to the right kind of things that are keywords in taxonomy and things of that nature, So there's a whole continuum of where you call yourself AI, which I think will be a hello world to me now. It's like prompt engineering on OpenAI is hello world, to truly doing all this stuff. Now, at the foundation of all of this is data engineering. Everybody, it's kind of the dirty little secret of AI is data. So if you don't have a really good object model, if you don't have a really good event model, if you don't have a really good security model, because not everybody can see the knowledge graph, it's especially built towards the enterprise, there's a lot of authorization that needs to be figured out as well in this. So if you have these things figured out, then the AI model is actually effective. But again, the question is, are you simply using a foundation model with prompt engineering? Are you really doing vector database as well? And I think that alone, just thinking hard about vector databases could bring a lot of delight to founders, consumers, and customers, because not everybody even knows what a vector database is. And even if people are, they just don't understand whether the embeddings from the off-the-shelf embeddings will work, or will I need to really go and build an LLM to get these embeddings right, and so on. So we are very focused on some of these things. To be honest, we started building a vector database on our own more than a year ago. So that piece is very natural to us. But what's not natural to us, and we continue to dig deeper into, is building the LLMs for encoders. I think we are working really hard on those things. I feel like we're still at 2 on 10 in really understanding semantics. But if you build a really good, just like CI/CD used to be for engineering, there's a CI/CD now where you need to refresh these things every second, every minute, every hour, every day. And you need to go and figure out what it means to regenerate the model every night as well. So there's a whole CI/CD discipline that needs to be had in
data
AI.
engineering, model engineering, or model training engineering. There's probably a full stack to be built there. Some is of course being built, right? But there's a lot to be built, because the way people work to build these things will probably evolve and change.
Absolutely. Including the RLHF, this idea that there's reinforcement learning with human feedback. In the fact that your apps are collecting a lot of good information has to be foundational as well. So I think to really answer your question, most companies should have to think hard about what I call the hardware, which is data is hardware. You can't just go and build like all this funky software on top of it. And also be aware that if you're building it on top of some larger incumbents ecosystem, you'll get AI washed. It's because they actually have the data. They can say that, look, we have built all this stuff, and they'll go and charge 20% more for their seats for all these AI copilots and such. So this moat around even building something on top of someone else's ecosystem, someone else's data, someone else's object model, someone else's event model, will also create this disillusionment in the hype cycle. There'll be this hype cycle. Oh, I built this on top of Salesforce. I built this on top of Jira. I built this on top of Zendesk. They have things built on top of them. Even if they might not do a good job, even if they just do prompt engineering with OpenAI, that alone is a very good way for your deals to be stalled and such. So people have to think harder about the hardware piece of it and doing something that is a bigger moat than just running on top of someone else.
It's not very easy, basically, for the newcomer, right, to crack into these, because the incumbents are sitting on large customer data sets, right, and are in-baked, and they can do incremental progress using these. And therefore, the newcomer has to be substantially disruptive, is what you're saying, thinking deeper and deeper, both about customer side as well as how they're going through the value chain.
Yeah, and thinking hard about it. Actually, I feel like if founders were to think harder and be a little bit more paranoid, they'll probably build better companies, as opposed to there is a froth. I need to be a part of this froth. because raising money is easy, and raising money will probably become an end in itself as opposed to means to an end.
Yeah, got it, got it. The other aspect I wanted to kind of touch upon in this whole GenAI wave is the impact on developers, right? There's one side which I keep hearing to our portfolio and founders and their teams is, of course, hey, it is turbocharging our engineers, right? The developers are, even the non-10x developers can do sort of 10x work because we give them AI co-pilots and we are able to do, right? There's a lot of testing that's automated. There's a lot of documentation that's automated, stuff like that. The other saying, hey, a lot of maybe mid to low end development work is anyway going to be fully automated by AI. And of course, the doomsday or the scary scenario is, hey, how many jobs are going to be lost to this, right? That's the broader conversation. So how do you see the balance of this? What does this impact? And this is like, we're talking about millions of developers across the world. And of course, we come from India, which has, which provides a lot, right? And that's one of our strong advantages over so many, right? Cost advantage of engineers being able to do so much at less cost than the West, right? So how do we put all of this together? GenAI impact on the development community.
If you were to look at developers and map them on a bell curve, with maybe demographics of just coming out of school as maybe innovators and early adopters, and there's early majority, there's late majority, and laggards. Many people who are in the last 5 years of their career, they'll just be laggards. They're like, I don't have to change, but many who still have a substantial portion of, they're very early on in this sort of bell curve, and they will, I believe, be better with AI rather than get disrupted. And this has always been true with tech. The incumbents, they get disrupted, but the newcomers, they actually get a lot of benefit from it. And when I say newcomers, I'm like people in their 20s and 30s, even the paranoid ones in their 40s will actually do well because it makes them better. It makes them shine. It probably brings them a little bit more work-life balance if they did it right and creatively. So, honestly, cloud did a lot of goodness. I remember we were shipping to 20,000 customers across 30,000 sites at Nutanix with $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion in annual revenue. And it was hard to push code to 30,000 sites, really, really hard. Yeah. And that creates a logjam. There's all sorts of back pressure created on releases and things like that. So cloud changed a lot of things, for a lot of people. They get imminent feedback, instant feedback, because we deploy twice a day. And there's no way I could have thought about this in on-prem. I feel like something similar is about to happen where the innovators and the early adopters and early majority will really benefit from AI. They'll actually, I feel like tier 2, tier 3 cities in India will churn out developers who look better than what they are today. Because right now they have to go to an Infosys university and be there for a year, be on a bench in Mysore somewhere, get trained, or Chennai somewhere. I feel a lot of those people, if they have access to GitHub Copilot, I would recommend they pay the $20 a month for the enterprise license and learn some, that's an amazing, imagine they're probably paying 10x of that for their tuition and fees. If they were to just say, I'm going to invest in myself, they'll actually be much better developers than what we've seen coming out of tier 2, tier 3 cities and colleges in India as well. So I feel there's an opportunity where people do better and more. I'm also an optimist in many ways. And, also a constant learner. I'm in my late 40s and I feel like I know very little. So I have to learn, I have to read. And I think most people who are like me, and those coming straight out of school, they probably know nothing better. Because the tools they have, the amount of exposure they have, the amount of media attention they have, and a lot of these people are just looking for a job. They'll do anything to get a good job, So, and I feel like they'll also plagiarize more with the machine, there was a time when all these testing, I feel like our interview processes are completely dead. We used to use code signal and look at the eye movement and like, oh, did they plagiarize? I'm like, what do you expect once they start doing a job? They were anyway using Stack Overflow for many things.
Yeah.
Right. So might as well now use the machine for these things, and the machine probably does a good enough job. Give it another year or two and it starts to really do a good job, 10x better job than Stack Overflow for sure. And I think one of the big things that will happen, especially on professional services, I believe, and this is my thesis and maybe a self-fulfilling thesis, because we want people to move out of existing incumbent business softwares, to us. I feel like that's a great opportunity for AI to disrupt B2B software, because most of B2B software is sticky because, I've built all this code and automations and customizations and things like that. So DevRev, we've actually done a lot of the data side of things. We just suck it in seconds. You can have 10 years worth of data and we'll suck it in, and in a really good way, which is aware of customizability of your old systems. But the code side of things, I feel like AI and GPT will help a lot. And that is what's going to keep B2B software companies honest. Because now you're no more sticky unless you're really delightful and you really, bring value and such. So in the next 10 years, all this professional services business, which is about B2B migration, I think we'll need to look really deep and hard into saying, how do we actually use AI to really port from the old to the new, from the Angular to the React, from the on-prem to the AWS, from the AWS to the Google. There's so much work that actually happens in just tech companies around just, re-architectures and rewrites and things like that. And not to mention Zendesk to DevRev and Jira to DevRev and Intercom to DevRev. All this stuff is about moving code from the old to the new. And these are really narrow problems that I think GPT will be able to solve in the next 3 to 5 years.
Interesting. I also want to ask you about, hey, you are sort of in the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, the heart of where a lot of this is happening, the action, and I'm sure it must be heady days, a little bit, of course, frothy, as well as, how people are talking about this wave. Which other industries do you see being substantially benefiting from GenAI? Right? Of course, technology is going to get so much more efficient, B2B tooling, etc. But how do we look at industry, vertical, others leveraging this, right, for solving really hard problems? What are you most excited about that GenAI can solve in different industries?
I think at least the way I would answer it is, again, go back to the anti-patterns, like what it might take a long time to influence are the ones that are regulated, but there's more litigation, there's more government oversight and so on. They're different businesses, they're not moving at the same pace at which non-regulated businesses move at, So I feel like that might be the true north for this. People will take more risks with AI, and those industries are just different industries than the ones that take way less risk because they have way more litigation, and way more regulated by the government and so on. And we saw this.
So healthcare, financial services.
Maybe fin services, there's new fin services and there's the legacy stuff. I feel like fintech will definitely benefit from this, even health tech, which is not looking at EMRs and EHRs, but the new stuff around wellness and population health. And there's so many things that are just complementary, individual health, those things will benefit from this for sure. But the ones that are highly regulated, they'll go slow. And again, I think here is where the opportunity lies. Like, what does it mean for industries to think about enabling people and giving them better tools? I mean, I love the fact that Microsoft is way ahead of the curve in saying every office user benefits. Sure. And I feel like that actually gives the awareness, just spreads the awareness about what AI is. So now even somebody who's at the bottom of sort of the totem pole, actually who's at least a white collar worker, will benefit a lot from this. Now, I think as the hype cycle ends and the valley of disillusionment begins, this happened with robotics, by the way, robotic automation. Everybody thought the factories are done. And it's the end of workers in factories. But what happened was that upgrading robots was way slower than reskilling people when they need to actually repurpose the assembly line with a new model or a new car or a new something. And that was mind-boggling, that software upgrades, especially with software meets hardware, robots were way more pesky to upgrade in terms of the components and the componentry and backward compatibility and testing and all this stuff than humans. So there is a human advantage of still being faster at change than the supply chain of the componentry that will actually drag robots back. So the question is, how much of this is true on the AI side of things, which is really in the digital side of things, which doesn't use physical componentry, but probably will still need a lot of supply chain thinking and, you know, what means to distribute thinking and so on. You know, I think time will tell. But I think it's pervasive. It's like the internet. But that being said, you go back from 95 is when Amazon started.
Yeah.
And before COVID, if you were to take a sort of stock of US retail, you might have said most things are online. Commerce is all online. But US retail was 5 trillion in 2019. And Amazon had 9% of the business. 9% after 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
So we can surmise based on some of that, that if it's that pervasive, the market is also massive. And every percentage point, I mean, even after COVID, it's still 14%. Even after COVID, still at 14%. So I feel like there's a long ways to go for this to be a doomsday scenario, a real, I would say, dystopian world where, you know, every job is lost. But those people who are in the last 5 years of their retirement, they probably don't care because it's going to take longer than 5. And those who are before that need to care. You know.
Got it. Got it. No, very helpful, great insights there. I think we also got to be cognizant of time. Some questions starting to come. There's just so much here that we could unpack. All right. While take a couple of questions. Okay. There's one question here. What do you think of, I think you spoke a little bit about this. What do you think of the India advantage for GenAI startups coming from India? Anything specific on the India side, right? I know you're there, you do help a lot of companies in India.
Well, I think the biggest advantage, I'll tell you this, is that students can afford to spend $20 a month to just get onto this and start to tinker. They don't have student loans. They don't have to worry about a lot of things, unlike other parts of the world. But there's humongous. I mean, education is relatively inexpensive in India, you know. So that has to be advantage of some other kind in terms of people going and learning all these things. I mean, we hire a lot from Upgrad, for example, you know, and, you know, we really have these people go through a really good training program. So go and ask Upgrad to really change everything to also become more AI focused and friendly and such. There'll be many such institutions in India that will upskill people in AI, and they will be way more affordable than anything outside India, you know. So that's a big India advantage. I think tier 2, tier 3 cities, sorry, my light just fell. Tier 2, tier 3 cities also, because of 5G and Reliance Jio and just the pervasiveness of broadband and stuff, will actually make a lot more people aware of this. And I feel like, you know, India is a very competitive market, so people will learn, you know, because there's so many students graduating every year that people will have to learn to stay competitive and so on, you know. And the other India advantage is that everybody asks for salaries when they're going for matrimonial alliances, you know, so you know, you have to be honest with all this stuff, you know. So there's many social pressures in India for it to be competitive, you know.
It's changing a little bit. I think, you know, the marriage market probably is a little more conducive to startup founders, risk takers than it was.
Bangalore, it will be, but I'm saying if you look at tier 2, tier 3 cities,
that's
there was a time when Oracle and Java were big. In matrimonial alliances, people look at resumes and talk about Java and Oracle. And now it will be AI and GPT. You'll see that pervade, you know, into other generations' curiosity and intrigue about how good the future son-in-law is. Or
on a lighter note, I think we're already seeing that in people finding it hard to find houses in Bangalore, right? And the owners are asking for your LinkedIn profile and maybe your GitHub profile and saying, okay, maybe I'll rent the house to you because you're good at AI.
Right. And I think that is just a really good way for people to learn, like, wow, I need to do more, I need to do better. And I think China went through a lot of this in the last 15, 20 years as well. And you have to learn a lot from China too.
Got it. There was one other question, actually two other questions. I'm mixing them, and it's an important one, right? While all of this, there's so much possibility and so much ambition that can be unlocked through this, right? Two big questions keep repeating: privacy, data security, to enable GenAI, the training itself, whether in enterprise use cases or in public or consumer use cases. So how do we solve for that? What are the big challenges there? How do you see that? Part two, we take that later, is, hey, cost, right? Seems like, hey, we use OpenAI or other services on top of either via Snowflake or AWS or Azure or whoever, right? Large companies, okay, well-funded companies, okay, but for smaller companies, it seems like a high cost, entry barrier maybe, right, to use these services, to use these APIs. How do you see the evolution of the cost playing out, price for access to LLM/GenAI over time?
Mm-hmm. So I think privacy will take care of itself. I feel like security has never slowed down innovation. I saw that even with crypto, by the way. I think SEC was way more permissive than I ever thought they would be. Eventually, they did clamp and with securities. I think this is a security, it's not a token. But I feel like US is just a penchant for taking risks, and it'll actually allow for these things, unless you're a highly regulated industry, in which case it will go slow. I think I talked about the security model. Good companies will think about the layering, the object model, the event model, the security model before they think of the AI model. I think a Snowflake-like model will also exist, like where the S3 is the customers and the compute is Snowflakes. I think similarly, so like, for example, our vector databases, they point to S3, and that S3 potentially could be customers S3, where the data could still sit there while the compute and inference actually sits with us. So there'll be such trusted models as well, where the data is at one place, the compute is at another. I think over and above that, you talked about cost. Every company worth its salt should at least start to get into the consumption business. They're like, okay, I pay by the drop, or OpenAI or whatever else they're using in the foundation models. Because if you actually are burning a lot of dollars with OpenAI, it's probably a good thing, unless you're really burning it in test and dev. It's a rich man's problem, a rich person's problem to say, I'm burning a lot in OpenAI calls, and especially if it's in production, looks like your thing is being used. And that's a good thing, So VCs will take care of some of that, although you should as well, because your P&L needs to be looked at. This P&L will actually have big AWS costs, which is really hard to go retrofit, or Azure OpenAI cost. But over time, people can bring it back to open source too. I think, you realize that, look, a lot of the inference is basically vector databases, because you don't need to generate every word. Remember, foundation models are generating the next word. And that probably is not sustainable, and not for just the businesses, but also Mother Earth. It's probably too much to burn for the next word. So vector databases will play a big role in this, because you're recalling a whole fact and then using augmentation on top of it, which is a much simpler problem than having to go and generate the next word and the next word and the next word and so on. But again, this goes back to Darwinism within this hype cycle. The ones who will take care of economics will actually turn out to be better companies. And we need to start to interview people, with that mindset as well. Because in the last 10 years, it happened. I mean, the best cloud engineers actually cared about economics as much as they cared about latency or uptime and security and things like that. So the new engineers, the new developers who are actually really well-versed with AI will care about the economics as part of their architectural decisions before they actually just go start using something. But it's a good problem to have. I mean, if they're paying by the drop, and if in production where their end users are using more and more of it, it's a good problem to have.
maybe the other angle of this and just extending the using it in production is great. And right. And just from a current status perspective, of course, there's the other part of the conversation saying, hey, there's a bunch of hallucinations, right, that needs to be solved for in certain context, right? Where do you need opinion versus where do you need fact/data to make real business decisions, right? So where are we? It seems super early, of course, but where are we actually? Many companies using GenAI in production. Are we there? Is that going to happen in the next 6 months? Is it going to take a couple of years? What's your sense on that? And you're already, of course, doing some of it. So I'm just curious to say, hey, how quickly is this going to be widespread in production, in your opinion, given there are still some challenges at the fundamental level?
If you go back in time to the internet, the early years of the internet, Arjun, you will realize that, the dial-up modem had a lot of fundamental issues.
Yes.
Right. When a phone call came, the dial-up modem disconnected.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing. Right now we have issues, but so what? Open source had issues. I mean, when I was in my first sort of startup in the Valley, Linux had immense number of issues. 2.2 would just go out of memory every day. You can go about 2 gigabytes of RAM. The Taiwanese hardware was actually quite crappy back in the day. Commodity was pretty bad, but then the question is, how do you use that to build differentiated companies? I mean, this is what differentiated Google from Yahoo. Yahoo had Solaris and NetApp and, and Oracle, massive, big oracles. I mean, you worked at Yahoo, so you know this.
Yeah.
And they were the biggest customer of NetApp. They were one of the biggest customers of Oracle RAC. They were the biggest customers of Sun Solaris and all this stuff, And here was this other company that's saying, look, we're going to use commodity stuff. And commodity needed a lot of engineering around it. Linux needed engineering. MySQL needed engineering. Hardware needed engineering. The gigabit switch needed engineering. There was so much of sort of fundamental weaknesses that they all had to engineer around. And I think this is no different. I think good engineers will work around these things. There's going to be a ton of feedback, which is going to come and help with understanding what is hallucinative or not. And then also vector databases will play a big role because the facts are facts. You didn't have to generate a whole thought from scratch. You took a thought out of a memory, a long-term memory like vector database. And then you're using foundation models for augmentation. I think many problems will actually be solved with that as well.
No, that makes sense. I think you're saying that, hey, use this big breakthrough capability tool, but at the end to solve the customer problem and to give great customer experience, whatever additionally you have to do until the fundamental even keeps getting smoother and smoother.
And
best companies will do that.
I think make the bots humble. There was a really good journal article like from 3 years ago. They did a lot of user research on which bots failed. Because a lot of bots actually failed and humans failed them. And the reason is the ones that were arrogant failed.
They know the answer.
As if they knew the answer. And people didn't give them a chance. And this is too cocky. Just like they don't give a chance to the smartest guy in the room. It's no different. I think there's an immense amount of design and human psychology that will make the humbler bots, the more vulnerable ones, more successful than the ones that are more arrogant and cocky about their retrieval and intelligence.
Interesting. That's a very unique point and something to keep in mind. Just as in humans, humility is a great trait. So should it be in AI? Right? We should remember that it has improved capability to answer a lot of questions, but it still doesn't know all the answers.
You're right.
Right.
You're right.
Got it. I know we're probably at the top of the hour. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, we'll take it.
Right. Yeah. I think
one other thing we could do, Arjun, is maybe do a Quora session for everything that we didn't answer. I could just type it out and we can just promote the Quora session or something.
Yeah, no, we could do that. We'll definitely follow up with that. Thank you. So one question actually is an interesting one, and I think is search disrupted? Google, of course, is we just discussed. They did something that Yahoo didn't do. And they've been the generational company among 3-4 others over the last 25 years, right? And search has sort of been the entry point to the internet for anything and everything. And from there, they have prospered and built. the juggernaut that they've built, right? Now it seems like, hey, the search box, is this still the entry point? There is the chat GPT, the prompt entry, right? For consumers, is that such a big shift, right? Basically, therefore, and I've built a consumer business in the past, so many other examples, right? Just core part of GTM, right? SEO, SEM, right? So many businesses were built on top of that, right? To ride on how to get to customers, right? How do we see this shift from access to customers, or where customers are going to be spending most of their time asking questions or navigating the internet in some sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's still a cold start problem before they get to your website. And some third party like Google search box will have to solve for that. Now, once they get to your website, the question is, do you have your own private search? Which up until now just didn't exist. It was pathetic. Like, you look at WordPress and all these content management systems, just didn't have search come out naturally. In fact, search is so pathetic in Zendesk and Jira and all these systems of record, Salesforce, they just didn't think through search as a natural thing. And now I think it will be more pervasive. Every developer, what they solve, will have to think about search to be as important a problem in terms of user experience as latency, for example, or design and number of clicks and things like that. Now, Google tried this. As you know, they kind of withdrew their appliance in 2017, 2018. They had a search appliance.
Yes, enterprise search appliance. Yes.
And I think going to Solar became Lucene, eventually the whole ELK stack and such. So Elastic, I feel like they are really going to find it hard to go from syntactic search to semantic search. Now it's going to come down to economics and how cheap is it to infer versus to do reverse index lookups and things like that. Inverted indexes will probably still have a role. We use both syntactic and semantic within DevRev, and people have to figure out courses, where do you use semantic, where do you use syntactic, because syntactic will still be much cheaper because it doesn't have inference like the way you have inference in vector databases. But definitely it becomes a very important tool, like Kubernetes was in the last 5 years, containers were. I think there'll be a verb like, did you search for it? Just like, did you containerize it? What happens to SEO, SEM, time will tell. I think there'll be a lot of junk websites, a lot of junk generative AI things that Google will have to really, really think hard about, because the number of websites proliferating, the number of SEO blogs proliferating because machines are generating junk is something that we really think hard about. And there'll be a lot of companies thinking about performance marketing. Performance marketing is all about quantity, versus the very few that will think about brand marketing, which is really going to be thinking top down, thinking about experience. It's not about quantity as much as about quality. And those companies that will differentiate with quality, and it ties back to their overall message and their, because there's a whole hierarchy of messaging, that you need to really think through when you're building a brand. And if you try to outdo that and say, look, I'm just going to generate a ton of SEO, it's probably going to come at a cost to your brand, and not do justice to performance marketing either.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Very helpful. No, I think, such a fascinating conversation. There's so much to learn. I'm going to cap it off with one question, right, to end, right? So, and we can keep going on, and we'll take some of the other questions that were there in a separate session with you, of course, and then, feed them to the audience later. But there was one question in the chat, and I'm also thinking is, what lies ahead? What's 5 years ahead? What's 10 years ahead? What is possible? And I think somebody's phrased it at, what do you see as a $20 trillion opportunity ahead, right? Outside of GenAI, outside of DevRev, what are you super excited about? What do you think is going to play out 5 to 10 years?
I think to predict weather models, if we can use these powerful models to really do better than what we've done in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Remote sensing, there's a lot of stuff where we're barely doing hardware in terms of imaging and sending satellites over and things like that. Because that isn't, look at what's happening in all countries, including India. in terms of these extreme weather patterns and stuff,
Yeah.
We need to think hard about a lot of these things. And I think AI will have to play a big role, including in one of my wife's and my personal passion is biotech and computing coming together. Resolving cancer in the next 10 years is going to be big. And I think we need to get a lot more. So speaking of India's advantage, if people could really read a little bit on biology and a little bit in computing and bring it together, because this is where the gap is, that biologists have very little understanding of computers and computer science know nothing about biology. Many more careers can emerge, and we'll probably solve some pesky cancer. I mean, cancer is not just one disease, as you know. I think it'll be huge to differentiate if they know one more thing, not just the same old Java, Oracle, GPT, but hey, I know a little bit more about mRNA and CAR-T and gene editing and gene therapy, immunotherapy. And there's few books they can read, and I think ideas will emerge. They can go work for these biotech companies, and that'll solve a lot of humankind's problems, because there's immense amounts of data. I mean, think of what SpaceX did to NASA. They basically made it look like software. Like SpaceX could do things in 1 year that NASA would take 5 to 10 years. It's just
also Tesla to the rest of the automotive industry in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of that stuff needs to happen in sort of emulation, simulation. Biotech will actually compress cycles that otherwise clinical trials take 10 years for. And I think those are, again, areas where computer science and biology, computer science and chemistry, computer science and material science, so I think it's just like knowing 2 languages, people can really differentiate if they knew 2 languages well, more than just one.
No, that's I think bang on, right? One pressing problem of what climate change is for all of us and the next generations. So super important to have more data, more insights to be able to solve them, correct? And to be prepared for the tricky situations. And of course, again, data leading to knowing the human body more, biology more, solving disease and longer life. So I think those are really fascinating for the next 5 to 10 years. And AI can really make a dent there. That makes a lot of sense. No, this has been so amazing, Dheeraj. Thank you so much for your time and for your candid conversations and your deep insights on so much, right? Really exciting to see how DevRev evolves, right? If I can, maybe you want to give a shout out. You guys are hiring, you guys are building, right? I'm sure there are operators.
We're hiring a building. We are really starting an amazing community that will do hackathons all day long. And for anybody who's raised less than $1 million, the software is free. Go use it for as many number of users as you want. We really feel like there's a new way of doing business. We don't know whether we'll be the ones, but this cannot be as hard as it is right now.
No, awesome. This is so amazing. Thank you so much. Congratulations on all the success, and hope you get more from DevRev. Right? I know there's a fair bit of India, Bangalore crowd probably listening in. I know you have a spanky new office as well here, right? So congratulations on that. Would love to catch up sometime. Right? You're also helping a lot of entrepreneurs in this part of the world. Right?
Learning from them. They're much younger than me, and they're probably much faster learners than I am. So I'm learning.
No, I think they will all benefit from this conversation, and hopefully they can also reach out to you directly as they're building amazing companies. Right? We'll take some of the questions later, but thank you so much. Signing off from Speciale Talks today, Dheeraj Pandey. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Good night. Good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.